How many cups of coffee does Starbucks sell in a single year? That's an example of a market sizing question that you're likely to encounter in your case interviews. But don't worry if this is your first time doing a market sizing question or even a case interview, because these questions are not meant to trip you up. You're not expected to know the answer off the top of your head. That would be crazy. What consulting firms care about is that you can approach these questions logically in a structured manner as you find the answer. Hey everyone, my name is 𝗙𝗿𝗲𝗀. I'm the founder of My Consulting Offer. Here at My Consulting Offer, we help people from all types of backgrounds master the market sizing question on their way to becoming management consultants. In fact, we've helped over 500 people just like you land their dream consulting offer. And the best news is you don't have to take my word for it. Hear how we helped Arjun with his dream consulting firm.
One of my cases for Bain was a school case, right? Like opening a school. And like the first thing I thought of, I was like, no way. Like I just watched like the MCO module on like school. So like it just all clicked for me. Like I was like, this is like unbelievably lucky. And I'm so happy that there was an example video on how an exceptional education case goes. So I was able to get the associate consultant intern offer, so the ACI program at Bain this upcoming summer, and hopefully I can return there as well. So I'm super excited.
In this video, I'm going to teach you why consulting firms ask these crazy market sizing questions, how you can best solve these market sizing questions and any market sizing question you might encounter, and ways to quickly master the market sizing questions. If you're joining us today for the first time, click the subscribe button, and every video that is released, you'll be the first to know and be on your way to landing your dream consulting offer. First, why do consulting firms even ask you these crazy market sizing questions? Well, let's say that you're on a real live case and your client is a soda manufacturer and they're thinking about entering the energy drinks business. You may want to start by knowing how big is the energy drink business. Is it $10 million or $10 billion? If it's $10 billion, the client might be interested. But if it's $10 million, they might just pass. So on a real case, the process to find out the answer may take days of searching for data as well as creating a model. But luckily for you, you don't have to do that in your interviews. In the interviews, your interviewers just want to know how well you can think through these problems by first creating a logical approach, second, making basic calculations, and third, clearly communicating the answer and why it matters to the client. Next, what is the general approach to answering a market sizing question? There are two methods that you need to know that will help you solve 100% of all market sizing questions. And if you know these two methods, you'll have an unfair advantage against anyone who doesn't know these. The two methods are top-down market sizing and bottom-up market sizing. Let's go over each so you know what they are and when you should be using them. The first is top-down, which means that you start with an entire population. For example, it could be the world population, a population of a country, or a population as small as the number of people in your city. Top-down is best used when your market is demand constrained. Demand constraint means that anyone who wants the product or service will get it. That is, there's no issue with supply. For example, while Starbucks could make 10 million cups of coffee per day, they want to know, is there a demand for actually 10 million cups of coffee per day? So the question you need to answer is, how many people want it? You would start with a large population and identify factors to break that number down. So you could use a top-down approach if you believe that Starbucks can supply everyone who wants coffee with a cup of coffee. The second method is bottom-up. And as the name implies, bottom-up means that you start at the bottom, or the smallest unit. For example, in our Starbucks example, you could use just one Starbucks store and then build up and calculate for all the stores. Bottom-up is best used when you're supply constrained. For example, let's say that you're trying to figure out how many cups of coffee a particular Starbucks could have per day. Well, you're probably limited, for example, during rush hour by how many employees and how many espresso machines Starbucks has. So you're supply constrained. So supply constraint means that there's plenty of demand, but the business may be limited by not having enough resources, for example, employees, time, space, or raw materials. Going back to the Starbucks example, bottoms up may make the most sense here during the morning rush hour when there are lines going out the door. So you have to take into account the demand, but you're limited by the number of employees and how fast they can serve customers. So you're supply constrained. So those are the two methods, top down and bottom up. Before you can do a market sizing, when you hear the question, determine if the problem is demand constraint, so you want to take a top down approach, or is it supply constraint, where you're better off taking a bottom-up approach. And regardless of the method that you choose, there's an easy 7-step process that you can use to solve any market sizing question. Step 1 is to ask clarifying questions to make sure you know what you're solving for. Most of the time, you'll be asking, are you solving for a money amount or the number of units? For example, is the interviewer asking for how many cups of coffee that Starbucks sells per day in cups, or do they want a monetary amount? Step 2, use a structured process. Focus on the factors that you want to look at in just words for now, no numbers. Once you've aligned on the process with the interviewer, then you can jump in and add the math. For now, you just want to have everything laid out in words. Step 3. Make the estimation easy. Keep it simple. For example, you don't need to calculate 12.7%. You can round it to 10% or 15%. Step 4. Use educated assumptions. Don't just pick random numbers. Use your personal experience, any industry knowledge you may have, or ask data from the interviewer. Step 5. Calculate. And do it out loud, and make sure you take your time to do it right. This can be tricky because doing math under pressure causes you to make mistakes you otherwise wouldn't have, such as adding an extra zero when you didn't mean to. So take your time with your calculations and make sure you have the accurate numbers. Step 6. Sanity check your numbers. Do your numbers make sense? For example, did you calculate that Starbucks would sell 100 trillion cups of coffee per year? If so, you probably added a couple extra zeros somewhere. So you want to go back and figure out where the mistake was made. Step 7. So what? What does this mean for the client now? Now that you have an estimation, how does it impact the client? So now that you know the 7 steps, let's see how they all work together. Now let's put all that together to solve the question for today, which is how many cups of coffee does Starbucks sell a single year? Okay, let's see a real life example of a market sizing so you know what to expect in your case interviews if you encounter a market sizing question. So I've asked Jean here to play the role of an interviewer, and for me, I'll play the role of the interviewee. So what we're going to do is Jean's going to start by giving the prompt in the same way that you can expect to get a prompt yourself. And then you and I are going to walk through each of the 7 steps together about how to solve a market sizing problem. So what I'll do is I'll explain each of the steps, and then Jean and I will act out what you can expect during an interview. All right, let's get started.
How many cups does Starbucks sell in a year?
Okay, so Jean just gave me the prompt for what we want to solve for, which is the Starbucks question of how many cups. But at this point, you want to start with stage 1, which is asking for more questions for anything that you don't already know. So in this instance, for example, Jean just gave me the prompt of Starbucks, but there's a lot I don't know. For example, even though she said she is wanting to know how many cups of coffee is sold, I can't be sure. For example, does she want the literal number of cups? Or for example, does she want a monetary value of how much money Starbucks makes from these cups? And I don't know, does she want me to market size this for entire world, or is there a particular city or region or even country that she wants me to focus on? So you'll notice in stage 1, I'm trying to clarify to make sure I have the right information, so I'm solving for the right question. Great, happy to help you estimate how many cups of coffee Starbucks sells in a year. But before I do, I have 2 questions. The first is, are we focusing on just the number of cups, or did you want, for example, a monetary value?
Just the number of cups.
Got it, so just the number of cups. And are we focusing on Starbucks for around the world, or is there a particular location that we're looking at?
Only in US market.
Got it, so we're looking for just number of cups in US that Starbucks sells a single year.
Yes.
Great, so that concludes step 1. Now that we finished step 1, which is asking clarifying questions, we'll move to step 2, which is for me as the candidate to ask for time to pause. So before a market sizing question, you want to make sure that you have structured thoughts. So it's okay for you to take a moment to pause and write down your thoughts. So you'll notice that I'm using here grid paper, which I recommend using because there's a lot of lines and you can keep your notes straight. So you'll notice that I'll ask Jean for a moment so I can structure my thoughts and write it down and then share it with her afterwards. So don't worry, you'll actually get to see what I'm writing on my paper in a later step. But for now, I just want you to know that step 2 is about asking for a moment to gather your thoughts and to write them down. And then in later step 5, where you'll actually be able to look over my shoulder at what I am doing as well as what I'm writing down. All right, let's go back. Great, could I have a moment to structure my thoughts and then I'll share them with you about how I would approach this problem?
Sure, take your time.
Okay, great. So in order to solve this problem, I'd like to be able to identify and solve for 4 key questions. So the first is we want to know how many people in the US even drink coffee to start with. And second, once we know the number of people who drink coffee, we want to be able to break that down to people who particularly choose Starbucks over, let's say, another coffee shop. Third is after we know the number of people who drink coffee and drink it from Starbucks, we want to know the number of people who buy it from Starbucks, so the actual cup versus, for example, going to Walmart and buying the bags pre-made and making the coffee cups at home. And then the final thing we want to do is how many cups do they consume at Starbucks per year? Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that concludes step 2, which is I took a moment to pause to write down my thoughts of how I would approach this problem and then shared it with Jean, my interviewer, before diving in. Okay, next we'll move into step 3 and step 4, which I'll combine in this one. So So in this step, we want to make sure to share with the interviewer our thought process as well as any assumptions before we do the calculations. This is super important again because you want to make sure that the interviewer is aligned to what you're thinking. So if you're about to make a mistake, that the interviewer can correct you and that the interviewer knows exactly where you're headed. So there's no confusion and they can trust you to do the math in step 5. So we'll do step 3 and step 4 combined. Great. So I'm glad that you're aligned to the approach. So here's how I'm thinking about it, and I'd like to be able to share with you my assumptions before I dive in and do the calculation, if that's okay. So the first thing that we wanted to solve for was how many people in the US drink coffee. So what I would like to do is start with the US population and then break out the age group that actually drinks coffee. For example, a 2-year-old is not going to drink coffee, so we just want to focus on the age that drink coffee. And of the people who are able to drink coffee, I know not everyone drinks coffee. For example, I don't drink coffee, so we're going to remove those people who don't. And from the people who are able to drink coffee, I'm going to assume that this is going to be age 16 to 80. So I'm going to assume that people live on average to 80, and there's equal number of people who are age 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and so forth to 80. So we're going to focus on 16 to 80. And then from there, I want to be able to estimate how many people actually go and drink coffee. So like I mentioned, I'm one person who doesn't drink coffee, and based on my friend groups, probably 3 out of 4 of us will drink coffee. So I'm going to say about 75% of people will drink coffee. And then after we figured out how many people from that 16 to 80 age group drink coffee, which I'm going to estimate at 75, I want to guess how many people actually choose Starbucks as the coffee shop they go to versus, let's say, another coffee shop. So in this case, I know that roughly out of my friends, about 1 in 4 will choose Starbucks whenever they can, even though there's another local coffee shop they can support. So I'm going to say that 25% of coffee drinkers will prefer to drink at Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I want to talk about how many people actually get their coffee from the stores, because you mentioned the cups from the store versus, like, for example, just buying the beans. Like, for example, ever since COVID, my grandparents have just been buying their own coffee beans versus going to a coffee store. But I think my grandparents are kind of out of the norm. So I'm not going to say that about 80% of people still prefer to get their actual coffee made from Starbucks versus, let's say, going to Walmart or Costco to buy the beans. And then finally, from there, I want to estimate the number of people and how often they buy from Starbucks. For example, there are people who are, let's say, I'm going to call them light buyers, who might buy 1 cup out of a month. And then there are, let's say, call it average or medium consumers. They might buy one, let's say, once a week. And then there are ones who are like my brother, who just buy a cup of coffee every single day. So I'm going to call them the heavy users. Mm-hmm. And so my estimation on this one is that they're going to buy a coffee cup every single day. So for now, my estimations are for the light, which is 1 per week. I'm going to assume that, let's say, 10% of Starbucks goers are like that. They'll just get it once a month. And then for the medium users, it's going to be roughly once a week. So I'm going to say that 80% of people are like that. And then the remaining 10 are like the heavy users, like my brother, who will buy one every single day. Does that assumption, do these numbers, do they seem right to you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. So since these assumptions are good to you, I'd like to move on and actually do the calculations, and then we'll be able to come up with an estimation of how many cups of coffee Starbucks sells in a single year in the US.
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so that concluded step 3 and 4. You'll notice I walked Jean through my assumptions before step 5, which we'll go to, where you'll be able to look over my shoulders and actually see the math being worked out. Great, so now we're in step 5. So as a recap, in steps 3 and 4, we just walked through the assumptions as well as what calculations we're going to do with the interviewer. So now that the interviewer is fully aligned and knows exactly what we're about to do, we can safely do the calculations without worrying the interviewer if we're on the right track or not. So in step 5, I actually want to walk you through what it's like as a candidate to go through the market sizing. So you'll notice 2 things here. One is you'll notice that this is from steps 3 and 4 that I walked through, which is in step 2, I outlined the 4 things I wanted to calculate, which is how many US coffee drinkers there are. Second is how many people drink coffee, prefer to go to Starbucks, and how many people go to Starbucks stores versus, for example, buying it at Costco. And 4 is how many cups of coffee per year do they consume at Starbucks. So you notice that I presented this as well in step 3 and 4, my assumptions, which is I wanted to examine the ages 16 to 80, 75% of those 16 to 80 drink coffee, and I assume that 25% of coffee drinkers will drink Starbucks. And within those, 80% will choose to do it exclusively in stores or in combination of stores, and then how many cups there are. So I broke it down into the light drinkers, the medium drinkers, and the heavy drinkers. So you can rewind this video to know where I got these numbers from. But this will form the basis for step 5, which is when we do the calculations. And I'm going to do the calculation out loud as if the interviewer was listening to what I'm saying, so you can see what you can expect in your interviews as well. So what you're going to do is I recommend taking another sheet of paper. So for example, I have another blank sheet of paper here. And what we're going to do is transform this step 2, 3, and 4 paper into the more detailed math that you'll need to do and to keep the final answer on. All right, let's do it. Great, so now what I'd like to do is proceed with the calculations to get to an estimation of how many cups of coffee Starbucks sells within a year in the US. So the first thing that we said that we were gonna need to calculate is how many people in the United States actually drink coffee. So in order to do that, as I mentioned, there's 2 things that we need to do. First is I wanna take the population of the US, which I'm gonna estimate the US population is roughly about 220 million people. But as we talked about, not every single person will drink coffee. For example, someone who's 2 years old will not drink coffee. So we mentioned that the age of coffee drinkers will be 16 to 80. I'm assuming 80 here because the average life expectancy in the US is roughly 82. So we're going to just do 80 to keep the math simple. And if you look at the ages here from 16 to 80, so if you do 80 minus 16, this equals 64. So there are 64 ages between 0 and 80 that will drink coffee. And 64 out of the total 80 here age, so 80 here, I'm going to figure out what percentage of this is of the US population. So both can be divided by 16. So then this gives us 4/5, which is 80%. So here you can see that 80% of the US population would be eligible to be part of the coffee drinking age. But of course, we said that not everyone who is of coffee age, for example, I'm of coffee age, but I don't drink coffee, will actually drink coffee. And we said though that 3 out of 4 people will drink coffee. So 3 out of 4 drink. So now what we have for step 1 is we have 32 million from the population of the US times 4 out of 5 of the age group we're covering times the 3/4 here. So you can kind of see here the math kind of cancels out. So 4 here, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the calculations. And 5 here, you can cancel out by dividing this here by 5, and then you'll get 64. So then you have 64 million times 3. So 64 times 3, get 2, 1. That's 19, and you have to carry the million. So we get about 192 million people from our original population who are of coffee drinking age and do drink coffee. So to simplify the math, I'm actually gonna round this up, if that's okay, to 200 million, so that 200 million is a little easier to work with here. So I'm gonna say from part 1 is how many people drink coffee in the US. That's gonna be 200 million people. So that's stage 1. So then what I'd like to do is go to stage 2. Which is how many people actually prefer Starbucks. And we said earlier that Starbucks is one of the most popular brands, but not everyone will drink Starbucks. But based on my friends, roughly about 1 in 4 of us will drink Starbucks. So then what I'm gonna do is take 200 million and multiply that by 25%, so 1/4. So that equals out to be 50 million. So now we've narrowed it down to 50 million people who will drink Starbucks. So that's a good next step. So we've calculated number 2. But in number 3 is we need to calculate what percentage of people actually buy their coffee from Starbucks in the stores versus, for example, going to Costco to buy the beans like my grandparents. So in this case, we estimated that would be 80% of the population. So then what we'll do is take 80 million and multiply that by 80%, which again is 4 out of 5. 1 here. So that equals 40 million. So now we have 40 million people who are eligible to do the cups of coffee. But of course, this is only one part of the equation that we need. The last step we wanted to do was to calculate out how many cups of coffee are consumed by people who go to Starbucks. And we said that there were three populations. You have the light consumers who will consume one a month. So every year they will go ahead and do 12. And they're only 10% of the population. So 10% of the population. Second is you have the medium who will buy at least one per week. So then what you'll have is 52 cups per year. And we think that that's 80% of the population of Starbucks goers. And then the third group here is the heavy, which will do one every day. So that's 365, like my brother. And they are only 10% of the Starbucks population. So you can kind of see here that we can do a weighted average of each of these. So what we're going to do is do a weighted average of each of these. So we can kind of see here, 10% of 12 is roughly about 1.2. 80% of 52 is roughly about the same as 80% of 50, which is 40, and 80% of 2 is roughly about 1.6. So this is about 41.6. And then we have 10% of 365, which is 65. So then what you have here is you have roughly 1.2 plus 41.6 plus 36.5. And that's it. 1, that's 3, that's 1, that's 9 here, and that's 7. So roughly it's 79.3 cups of coffee at Starbucks. That's a lot per year. So we're just going to round this up, make it easy. So we're going to say this is 80 cups. All right. So now we know that we have 40 million people from step 3, and there are 80 cups that the average Starbucks consumer consumes a year. Then what you can do is take the 80 cups and then multiply that here from the 40 million. And you get there 40 cups. Then you'll get here 3200, and then carry the million. So it's 3,200 million, which is equal to 3.2 billion. All right, so we've got a calculation of roughly in the US, Starbucks in their stores will sell every year about 3.2 billion cups of coffee. So I'm gonna highlight this for later. Okay, so that's an example of how to do step 5, which is the calculation. So you notice how I wrote it down line by line. So I wrote it in extra big font so that you can see from your device, but normally you can write as big or as small as you want. But in this case, you notice how each of the steps, I made the math very simple by rounding numbers, but also at the same time following to the plan that I already outlined with the interviewer, so they know exactly what I'm doing. So in this case, I have 4 calculations here, and I calculated 1, 2, 3, 4, and eventually got my answer here to be an estimated 3.2 billion. Great, so we just concluded step 5, and we have our estimation for how many cups of coffee Starbucks sells in a single year. But regardless of your market sizing question, at this phase of the question, you want to proactively tell the interviewer if this number, if you think it's too high or too low with step 6, which is to sense check your number. So but let's imagine in this example that I forgot to do that. So you'll see that the interviewer, in this case, Gene, is going to ask me, do I think that this number is too high, too low? Is it reasonable? And in this case, you want to be able to give an answer. But in an ideal situation, you don't want to wait for the interviewer to tell you and ask you to sense check your number. You want to do that proactively. But let's imagine I forgot to do that. So Gene's going to do that, and you'll hear my response to it.
Great. Do you think that number is reasonable?
Sure. So we estimated that about 3.2 billion cups of coffee are sold by Starbucks in the US every single year. So if we think about 3.2 billion, so that's about 3 billion, and I think about the fact that an average Starbucks coffee costs about $4, so 3 billion times $4 is about 12 billion. So if we think that Starbucks is about a $12 billion a year business, then it would be reasonable. And based on the fact that Starbucks is a major food and beverage company, I would imagine that business like that on the US would probably be in the 10s or 20 billion. So I would say that that estimation is about right.
Great.
Okay, so that concludes step 6. So whether or not the interviewer asks you, or better yet, you proactively tell the interviewer what you think about the number, you want to be able to sense check your number. Because if it is too high or too low, you want to go back to your step 5 and readjust some of your numbers. And if it's just right, you want to proceed to step 7, which is the final step. So in step 7, you want to answer the question, so what? So the client didn't just pay you to answer this complicated question, spend weeks on Excel building this model out just for you to not have an answer. So what you want to be able to do now is to tell them, so what did they pay you for? What's the so what? How is this relevant to me? And this will all come down to the client situation. So you'll notice that in this situation, I'm actually going to be sharing 2 examples so that you can see how the client situation affects step 7's answer. So in the first scenario, we're going to assume that this is a Starbucks competitor. And in the second example, we're going to assume that this is a Starbucks partner. Let's say like a coffee bean supplier. So I think this number looks really promising because I know our coffee shop right now is currently not in the United States and trying to enter. And looking at these numbers, I think this is very promising for our client because even if we can only capture a fraction of the market share of Starbucks, we're already stealing away from a $12 billion market that Starbucks currently has a command of. But the thing that I would want to work with the client on is product differentiation. Just even that we don't have any presence in the United States right now, I want to see how we can actually compete with Starbucks. All right, so that's example 1 where we're a competitor to Starbucks entering the US market. But now let's imagine that we're a partner with Starbucks supplying their coffee beans in the United States. So it looks like Starbucks produces about 3.2 billion cups of coffee per year. And given that we're a major partner with Starbucks, I think this is very promising for our client because I know that our contract renewal is coming up with Starbucks. And one of the things I want to know is talk to the client about, are there alternatives that Starbucks can go into? Because if we're the major supplier for their coffee beans, I think that gives us a lot of leverage in our next negotiation to ask for better pricing for Starbucks. And I think that will help our CEO be able to achieve their profit goals for the year. All right, so you'll notice there that in step 7, I gave the so what. What does this mean? And you saw 2 different examples, one as a competitor and one as a partner. So you always want to be thinking about this when you're doing your market sizing, which is, why does this matter to our client? All right, that concludes the market sizing example. So now you've seen an example of how to solve a market sizing problem. By the way, if you're curious, the actual answer with Starbucks' own numbers is 2.9 billion cups of coffee. So we were pretty close. But knowing that number won't help you because you're going to encounter numerous different types of market sizing questions in your interviews. So let's make sure that you're prepared for not just Starbucks, but any market sizing question you might encounter. Now, how do you actually do that? There are 2 great ways that you can master the market sizing. The first way is to create market sizing problems in your own daily life. For example, let's say that you're a sports fan and you enjoy watching football. The next time you watch a football game, during a commercial, ask yourself, how many football fans are there in the world that watch at least 1 game a year? Or if you're ordering at your favorite restaurant, ask yourself, how many people eat at this restaurant every single year? And then there's a second way and much faster way, which is you can allow my team and I to help you. When you work with my team and I, we'll give you an entire curriculum teaching you even more strategies, tips, and tricks to solve market sizing problems that you'll encounter, including numerous examples of live cases. Second, you're going to receive one-on-one coaching with former McKinsey, Bain, and BCG consultants who are going to work with you one-on-one to make sure that you can master case interviews, cover your weaknesses, as well as build on your strengths. We have a proven process. In fact, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's Arjun and Brenda, 2 clients who worked with us to land their dream consulting offers.
My name is Arjun 𝗙𝗿𝗲𝗏, and I am a junior studying bioengineering at the University of Illinois. I joined college not knowing what I wanted to do. I was debating between industry or even pre-med. During my freshman year, I realized neither was, a passion of mine. So I went to a consulting for engineers event, and that's when I really found out about the career path. That's when I really began my pivot into the business side of things. My sophomore year, joint concerns I had was one, of course, the cost, just the monetary value of it. And the second was, how was this program even unique compared to the other ones that are out there? And I realized that both of those were well worth it, even at the time before I even joined. I decided, no matter how it goes, I think I would regret not doing this program because who knows what could have happened if I did. Though it doesn't seem like to overcome these concerns is utilizing there's so many different aspects of the program. MCO had a lot of unique value propositions. One I thought was super useful was the Facebook community. I think that's just not underrated in regards to you meeting people who are in the same position as you and casing with a wide variety of people who have different approaches, majors, backgrounds, etc. that have taught me is just the modules that Davis had, not just the video modules, but the drills specifically. I thought the structuring drill was by far the most influential on my, for me. I guess I had two favorite parts. One was, of course, I think just the level of communication I was able to have with you and Amar, for instance. I thought just the response and rate and just the how fast you guys got back to all my questions was super helpful. So all these tidbits and inside information helped me a ton while applying to these different MBB programs. And on the other side, it was the Facebook community. I have to go back. That honestly, it well worth the investment, and I'm super glad that I did it. At the end of the day, if you put in the hard work with the program and utilize all its resources, it will pay off in the long run, 100%. So I was able to get the associate consultant intern offer, so the ACI program at Bain this upcoming summer, and hopefully I can return there as well. So I'm super excited for that.
Being a part of the community at my consulting offer really helped me to secure my offer at BCG, and I'm really grateful for Davis, Marcus, and everyone else in my consulting offer community. I only had 1 week to prepare before my first round of interviews at BCG for their full-time associate position. And I was studying engineering in my final year in a non-target school, and this was my first ever case interview experience. So prior to that, I never really did a case before. I didn't know exactly how it works and to practice where to even begin or where to go. But thank God my sister introduced me to Davis because she was previously his client as well. And I was really impressed by how Davis responded because he was quick to respond and enthusiastically as well. He wasn't intimidated by the fact that I only had under a week to prepare, but instead he was confident to jump on board. So that itself gave me motivation to want to do my best and give my best effort, believing that I actually have a chance to pass this interview.
Want to learn about how my consulting offer can help you land your dream offer? For a limited time, I've asked my team of former Bain, BCG, and McKinsey recruiters to help anyone who's watching this video get more interviews and land more offers. When you click the link next to this video in the description, you'll be able to book a free 30-minute strategy session with a member of my team. The best part is that this call is free because we typically charge $1,000 for these strategy calls. But for a limited time until slots run out, you're able to book these calls for free. So feel free to grab one of your free strategy sessions today. All you have to do is click the link in the description below this video and schedule your free strategy session.